Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Hello, folks. Welcome to GOTO Unscripted podcasts, where we discuss a whole range of technical topics in friendly conversations. Today, we're going to talk about handling AI-generated code, exploring challenges, best practices, and its impact on developer workflows, which is quite a hot topic right now. I am Roman Zhukov. I'm a cybersecurity expert with more than 70 years of experience securing large-scale platforms and products. I'm now with Red Hat, where I drive open source security strategy and cross-industry collaborations. And today, I'm joined by Damian Brady. Damian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I'm Damian Brady. I am currently on the other side of the world from you, Roman. I'm over in Australia. I work for GitHub currently and previously worked for Microsoft as a developer advocate. About 20 to 25, depending on how many years you count, of development experience. Just recently, especially with GitHub and Microsoft, there has been a definite push towards AI-assisted software development, I think, which is, fascinating. It's a bit of a change to the way that I've always traditionally done that kind of work. So I think what we're going to talk about today is how this, there are a few things, obviously, but how this affects the developer workflow itself. This is definitely something that we talk about a lot at GitHub, and I talk about a lot with other developers as well, is how that changes. And I think, the obvious change for me, especially with kind of agentic kind of tooling, is that we've moved from the hour that you have to write code is an hour of coding to potentially some of that work can be offloaded elsewhere while you do some parallel work. So almost like a scaling factor. Is that something you've seen as well, Roman? Just at the surface level.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we also see the huge developer workflow transformation. But I would say we don't see AI as a replacement for all of the developers, all the junior developers and etc. It's more like an amplifier to get things faster. And also, I've seen the research by, I think it's Matter. This is the name of the company. They've done research and they came up with the conclusion that developers felt around 20% faster when they're using AI tools like Copilot, Cursor, Claude, and etc. But actually were 19% slower in complex tasks to deliver a complete product or release or whatever. I think this is the good representation of the reality we live right now with the code development. So it obviously accelerates the development itself, but in order to make the actual release or a high quality product, you still need to have the human in the loop, and you still need to cook it right, as we call it.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I think part of the hype issue that we're seeing in the industry with AI tooling is kind of the lack of clarity around what the tooling is good for, what the AI tools are good for, and what they're not good for. So it doesn't matter how good your AI dev tool is, it's never going to replace a human in working out exactly what the requirements need to be and speaking to the people. Copilot or Cursor or Codex or Claude or anything, and they're never going to be in the same room as the product managers and the owners and the customers as well, working these things out. So while these tools might be great at certain tasks, even, unsupervised, like, can you make sure we have tests that cover all of these functions in this area? Like that's a relatively straightforward, easily defined topic, but there's something more complex. Like, can you end-to-end implement a new payment methodology or something along those lines probably needs a lot more human eyes in it, in which case those tools can be great, especially if you know how to use them really well, but they really do need a human driving that kind of work, I think. So yeah, I mean, the tools are great. The tools are really powerful, but you can't just throw the problem at the tool and expect it to solve it completely first go.
Yeah, that's true. And we also see some of the inconsistency in how different companies or communities actually apply or allow the usage of AI. We Red Hat is, as GitHub, I believe, also quite an unusual company, right? We are huge contributors to open source, to upstream communities, and we work with them quite extensively. Our position here, Red Hat stands on it. We definitely are not banning AI. But we rather would like to innovate responsibly in that way. And we see there are a lot of different trends and battles in developer communities that we work with, how to tackle AI-assisted code contribution and the problems that they potentially can introduce. Almost everything that we do, Red Hat, is actually in open source. And over the past year, we have been investing a lot, both internally into our own engineering practices and exploring how other communities actually work with generative AI and all of these code contributions. Working in the open is our culture for sure. And we believe it's really important to share what we're doing, what we're learning, and etc. And we usually say the upstream is downstream for us. We really do the majority of the work in open source.
We obviously, like over at GitHub, it's a little bit of a biased environment because we are trying to make these AI tools as well. So GitHub Copilot was kind of the one of the very first commercial kind of products that used LLMs, especially for developers. Similar kind of efforts with open sourcing. So the VS Code team over at Microsoft recently open sourced the Copilot extension and kind of have built it now into the product itself. So we've also kind of, I mean, we tend to allow people to use the tools that they want to use, I think. So, and this is a personal thing for me as well. If the tool that you're using is a great tool for use, then you should keep doing that. I don't think you can say very clearly one AI dev tool is better than another necessarily. It depends on the task. It depends on your familiarity, even depends on the code base. So having that kind of openness about what you can use and what you're allowed to use is kind of a great thing. So obviously internally, as we're writing these tools, we're using them. We do, we've stopped saying dog fooding now. We drink our own champagne is the way that we like to put it, which is same thing, but a little bit nicer. Yeah, we do use it internally a lot to the point that I think Copilot Copilot Coding Agent is now the number one contributor to the GitHub code base. And I think number 3 is Copilot Code Review. So it's not even just developing the code, it's making suggestions about, code reviews and things like that. So yeah, we obviously use it internally quite a lot, but speaking to customers is not always the case. There's a lot of question around, especially if you're using these tools, where does that code come from and who owns that code? And is it safe to just let people use these tools and generate code and then push that out to production? There's a lot of variation in how comfortable companies are with that kind of thing. It sounds like Red Hat especially, and you're kind of relatively comfortable using these tools as tools, I guess. But I don't know whether you've seen that in the industry as well, that there is a bit of a reluctance to hand over the keys if you put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how we switch gears a little bit to code quality and trust or mistrust or whatever problems that we can actually have while accepting these AI code contributions. And this is the problem definitely. And we see, again, the different companies tackle it differently. What we think is the legal and ethical standards hasn't changed actually. Even the tools have changed, right? We actually wrote it in our blog that is called something like Navigating Legal Issues while accepting AI-assisted code contributions and development. AI systems are not authors that developers are, right? If you commit code, you're solely responsible for its quality, security, and licensing, of course. AI systems, at least right now, are not considered as authors under copyright law and other general understanding, I think, how the legal is working. But yeah, it would be still misleading, for example, for developers to present substantial AI-generated output as purely their own work. So that is kind of the augmentation. This should be admitted first, and then I think it should be documented well. That's why, for example, the solution to this problem could be by requiring developers adding assisted by or helped by a disclaimer when they commit their code, for example, and be careful with their licenses, of course. We have our own list of the practices that's also outlined publicly in our blog that we recommend for our developers and for everybody else actually to implement why they use AI assisted tools, but we definitely not ban them. What do you think?
I mean, ultimately, using other tools to assist in the development it's not really a new problem. The AI part is the new problem, and the fact that to a large extent these large language models are a bit of a black box. You know, you ask a question, there's a prompt, and then there's a inconceivable number of if statements inside a terabyte-sized model sitting in a server somewhere, and then what you get out the other end is some code. That's the new bit and the scary bit, I think. Personally, I think there's a bit of a sliding scale about what is appropriate to do with AI-assisted tooling. So if you are actively working with the tool, asking for suggestions, and it's giving you code snippets, or I guess even a little bit more, it could change, half a dozen files, and then it's your responsibility to look through the files as a developer and see those changes and test them yourself. But if that is kind of a synchronous process, I think it's just, I like to think of it a bit like all of our previous generation of code generation tools, like the templating engines. And we have a database schema, so let's generate the data objects in your object languages. It's just a little bit more non-deterministic, I guess. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is cloud-based or offline or background tools, where you give it a prompt and then you get a full solution later on down the track. You get a full end-to-end implementation of a feature or something like that. The way that we've positioned that at GitHub, and I think this is pretty standard practice now, is you don't hand over the keys and say, here, go just put code in production. Everything that gets done by that agent is submitted as a pull request. It is tracked in github.com as this was committed by by Copilot coding agent on behalf of the developer who requested that work. And the code review was done by this developer and so on. So there is that very clear traceability of this is what wrote the code. But that's where it gets a little bit more gray in my mind. It's like a unclear. You've given it the prompt. You've ideally given it a bunch of custom instructions and specific agent, custom agents, and chosen the model, and you've got guidance and so on. However, it's ultimately just gone in one end and then code has come out the other end. And it's still your responsibility as a developer or a dev team to verify that is the correct code to be using. So yeah, I think I agree with you for 99% of that. I think it's unlikely to be the case anytime soon. I think that the AI itself will be responsible for the code that gets developed. We're just dealing with a more complicated kind of looking up Stack Overflow and copying and pasting code, I guess, is kind of the way I like to. So yeah, not ultimately a new problem, but a kind of new level of the same problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my remit, from security perspective, I also see there are a lot of security concerns related to AI code contributions, but the majority of them actually not new by nature. They're just happening at the new scale. One of the recent examples that I can brought up, as we all use all of these AI-assisted tools, there was the malicious Claude incident, I think, a month or a few months ago, where a package named Claude Codes, which is actually fake one. But when developers ask AI to include some of the packages or to include some of the extensions, AI actually suggested this completely hallucinated Cloud Code extension, and that got ingested actually into the development repositories, which potentially could lead to unexpected consequences, and of course all of the security concerns.
Yeah.
So it's one of the problems that we see, because look how developers right now are consuming AI tools or AI models or whatever. They just pull them sometimes blindly straight away from the hubs, like Hugging Face, for example, with a 1-2 command, but they don't necessarily explore what this kind of model or artifacts that they came from, right? And what they could potentially include. And again, this is not the brand new problem, because supply chain issues are with us for a few decades now, but the scale of the problem is significantly bigger right now.
Yeah. But I guess on that point, then how do you make sure that these tools are giving you code that is trustworthy and it's not even trustworthy, I guess, but good quality? Obviously, as an experienced developer, you've been writing code for a number of years. And so if you get this result from an LLM, you can, as long as you're paying attention, you can look at it and say, great, this looks correct. But especially junior developers, or I don't know, somebody who maybe doesn't care quite as much, just wants to move the ticket from one column to the next column. How do you verify in your organization that the code quality is there and the security vulnerabilities aren't?
Yeah, that's a perfect question, and I would answer it probably in two ways. The first important thing is education, and to make sure we actually educate developers, especially junior developers, but also everybody else, how to write the code using AI assistance securely. That's why we feel it's extremely important to collaborate with other industry leaders like GitHub, Microsoft, and others at communities like Open Source Security Foundation, OpenSSF, for example, to make sure first we collect all the good security practices for AI code assistance, and second, we compile all of these practices into short and concise guidance and free classes, so that it enables developers to use AI securely. And you actually can Google OpenSSF AI secure development practices. They're completely free. No registration is required, so you can consume them right away. And I'm one of the contributors to these practices, among other folks. And while we were doing this, we made sure we provide really developer-centric recommendations. For example, these guidelines include the specific prompt suggestions. For instance, don't write prompt like, okay, create me the identity handling function, or create me like the passwords form or whatever, but make sure that you use all of the secure by design functions and extensions that can help me to do so, or avoid unsafe packages, for example, usage without explicit review, or I don't know, use crypto functions in specific way that are well known, well recognized within the specific latest version, something like that. So this difference, how we prompting our AI assistants to create secure code and ultimately secure products, really make difference from my perspective.
Yeah, I also like the idea of kind of codifying that in your code base and in your repositories and in your organizations. I'm pretty sure almost all of the AI agent, dev tools at the moment have the ability to have kind of custom instructions or agent instructions in them. I know Claude does, for example, you can have agents MD file, which gives that information. So, with working on an area of the application that touches security, you can have instructions in these files to say, basically exactly what you said, follow these guidelines, use good cryptographic libraries that we know about, and use standard auth protocol, like processes and so on. Don't roll your own and things like that. I know at least with GitHub, we have the capability of defining those at the enterprise and organizational level as well. So you can say, apply these standards and these extra prompts and meta prompts and so on at the organization level. Mm-hmm. So you can put those things in. I think it's also probably useful to use some of these tools that are designed specifically for software development. So as opposed to dumping a bunch of code in ChatGPT and saying, can you write an authentication, for this application? There's nothing in the way of kind of pulling a terrible practice out and giving you those results. Whereas, again, Copilot is the one that I know the most, so I can use that as an example, but there are filters kind of in place. So you're not going to get responses that have security vulnerabilities in it because there is a responsible AI process at Microsoft that requires that we go through these filters when we give the AI-based results. So using the right tool for the job rather than just throwing it at a raw LLM is probably, it can go some way to doing it. But again, never a replacement for a human in the loop, I don't think, or somebody who knows what they're doing, a proper security review and things like that.
Yeah, that's true. I completely agree with this. And I think trust, or actually zero trust, is still the right concept to apply even to this new world. And I think it's key to ensure we get the real value of AI-powered speed increase, right? To create truly production-ready solutions as opposed to just wipe code. Something I threw out an example about the AI model consumption, for example, and we also have seen a lot of incidents related to it when some malicious code or workloads could be included in the AI models itself and then injected into the organizational workflows, so that it leads to stolen credentials or establishing the reverse shell to command and control server by malicious actors and etc. And I think with this, trust starts with provenance. If you and our listeners familiar with the traditional provenance concept for software artifact, when we have this metadata that attached to artifact, to piece of code or to binary that actually can tell you how this artifact was produced, so that you can make sure it's not tampered, it's authentic, and etc. We try to apply the same provenance concept to AI space as well. For example, to attach these verifiable artifacts or metadata to training data, to AI model itself, and to the complete AI application or system that end users will be interacting with. How do you even audit these systems when you don't know what's training data, for example, influence it, and etc.? That's why concepts like data provenance standards that we are working on together within the industry among all of the big tech companies comes to play, so that we can standardize the things like data provenance, like AI model cards, or even the full AI system cards that we can perceive as a nutrition label for the, in this case, entire AI application that documents the complete AI operational environments, platforms, and a detailed system architecture, and includes even security posture. I think to our conversation that we discussed a little bit earlier, how to enable developers and how to enable people to kind of verify that the codes or the applications are secure and good enough. So we need to provide them some level of assurance of it. So the provenance and the documenting the practices is the one way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing, I mean, that's an incredibly good effort and something I think the industry as a whole should really embrace. I think from a local perspective of if your application and your developers are using these AI tools, I think nothing can replace the structures and the processes you have already for software development. So having code reviews and having security audits and the builds and tests and all of those processes that you would have had, regardless of where the code comes from, can also help with making sure that, at least for individual projects, that if those structures are still in place, ideally, regardless of where the code comes from, ultimately, you still have those builds and tests and audits and things like that as well. Yeah, I agree. It sounds like it's a great initiative to kind of give the provenance of where all of this stuff comes from.
I think we touched a little bit on this already, but what is your opinion about the human in the loop thing and how the skills and roles right now evolves around this? Again, kind of, should we fire all of the junior developers and etc.? So what do you think how they say, I think, affects the roles?
I think this is probably a good last thought, actually, as we get close to a time limit. I think very much in the way that new languages and new techniques and new processes and so on for software development have always kind of cropped up. And then we've made an effort to train upcoming developers and upcoming technical people in those new techniques and those new languages and the new frameworks and libraries and tools. I think we need to have a concerted effort to train the upcoming developers and junior developers in the tools and the processes that we use now, which means using the AI tools and working out how to get the most out of them. And admittedly, we're still learning that ourselves. This is still very much a work in progress. There's techniques now like kind of spec-driven vibe coding that have really only been around for a few months, but are proving to be very useful. I think as we learn these things, we just need to make sure that we're passing that knowledge on to the next generation of developers as well. And that's going to take a concerted effort as an industry, I think.
Yeah, I also think we should do it evolutionary, right? And I take it as we are getting closer to the skill shift from syntax experts to system architects, let's put it that way, because it sounds like it is not really a big deal right now to generate the 1,000 lines of code. And we don't necessarily need to be major experts, even in programming languages that we do with this. But then it comes to review rigor, right? And to all of these things that we need to do after probably the first rounds of generated code is here now. We should do the better prompting. We should challenge the LLM. And I found it particularly useful for myself. For example, if I see something wrong, I try to provide examples, and I see how the modern LLMs actually do it better when you provide the certain examples or link or references. For instance, hey, you used Esther copy. Why is that safe here, right? I write the using a bounded string copy function, for instance. Quite a simple example, but the other thing could be, hey, explain the security implications of this change that you've made to this code, or within any circumstances, touch these kind of code or these folders, or, something like this. So these kind of skills, I think, would be very unnecessary to teach to the next generation of the developers, as long as the basics about the architecture, the software architecture, and the coding practices itself.
Keeping some fundamentals in there, for sure. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of change that's just happened and a lot of change that's yet to come as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it progresses over the next months, years, decades even.
I absolutely agree. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GoTo podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.